My name is Hannah Reed, and I have never forgotten the day my life changed forever. I was born and raised in a small American town called Harbor Falls, a quiet place with long roads, wide skies, and neighbors who cared more about gossip than kindness. Growing up, I always felt like I did not fully belong there, but I stayed close because of my parents, Thomas and Grace Reed. I thought we were a family. I thought their love was real. It took one terrible winter afternoon to show me I had been wrong for years. Before the accident, I lived two different lives. In one life, my parents saw me as their daughter who worked a simple office job. They believed I earned just enough to pay my own bills and send them a little help from time to time. They never understood how I could afford things so easily, and they never asked too deeply because they assumed everything came from luck. In the second life, my real life, I was the founder and owner of a growing software company called Silvergate Solutions, with offices spread across America and new clients contacting us from Europe. I had built it from nothing, writing code in the corner of a rented apartment in Columbus and working 12 hours a day until my hands cramped. My parents did not know because I never told them. Not because I wanted to hide, but because I knew they would change the moment they saw money. I wanted love, not greed. A few years before the accident, Silvergate had its first big expansion. The moment I signed the contract, I made a decision I still don't fully understand. I bought my parents a house. It was a sturdy brick home in Maple Creek, Colorado, with a white fence that wrapped all the way around the yard and roses climbing up the porch rails. The house cost $650,000, and I paid for it in cash. I told them it was a company housing gift, a lie that kept them from asking questions. They moved in happily, never once thinking about who had really made it possible. At the time, I was proud to give them something so beautiful. Later, I realized that gift was the last real piece of love I ever offered them. Then came the winter trip to Cleveland, the trip that changed everything. I had gone there to meet a European partner who wanted to use our software across their offices. It was a deal worth millions, a deal that would put Silvergate into a new chapter. But as it turned out, success meant nothing when your car met a sheet of black ice at 60 miles per hour. The crash is something I almost remember. One moment I was driving, watching the wet road ahead, and the next moment a large truck skidded sideways. There was no time to turn or stop. The world exploded into sound, metal, and flying glass. When everything finally went quiet, I remembered two things: pain and darkness. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself lying in a hospital bed, numb except for the burning in my legs. The machines around me beeped like distant alarms, and the ceiling above me looked too white, too bright. At first, I felt comforted seeing my parents sitting at the foot of the bed. My mother was holding her purse tightly, and my father sat stiffly with his arms crossed. I was scared and exhausted, but I still believed they were there because they loved me. That belief shattered quickly. My mother looked at me with the same expression she used when she was disappointed in something trivial, like a dirty dish or a late bill. "Hannah," she said sharply, "this is a problem. You lost your job. You had one thing to do, and you failed." Her words hit me harder than the crash. I blinked at her in confusion. My voice came out cracked. I didn't lose my job. I had an accident. My father's expression did not soften. "You can't work like this," he said. "You'll be weak for months, maybe years. We can't take care of you. We're not rich, and we can't carry someone who can't help us. You were supposed to help us, not become a burden." I stared at them, speechless. I wanted to shout the truth. "I own a company. I pay for your house. I pay for your bills. I paid for your last vacation. I made your life easier than you ever made mine." But the words stayed trapped in my throat, stopped by shock and heartbreak. They stood up without another word. My father grabbed his coat, and my mother pulled her purse strap across her shoulder. She didn't touch me. She didn't even look at me one last time. They started walking toward the door, as if they were leaving a restaurant, not their injured daughter's bedside. "We're leaving," my father said coldly. "You aren't helpful anymore." Then they walked out. The door swung shut behind them. They never looked back. A nurse named Lena, a young woman with gentle eyes and a soft voice, came into the room a few moments later. She took one look at me, my shaking hands, the tears I hadn't even noticed yet, and hurried to my side. "Oh, honey," she whispered. "Are you okay?" I wiped my face with the back of my hand, embarrassed even though she had done nothing but care. "I'm fine," I lied. "It's just now I know who my parents really are." She didn't say anything. She only squeezed my hand and let me cry quietly until the tears stopped by themselves. That night, I lay in the dark hospital room listening to the steady beeping of the machines. Every beep felt like a reminder that I was alive, not because of them, but in spite of them. I thought about the house in Maple Creek. I thought about the years I spent trying to earn their love. And I realized something painful and simple. I had been paying for a place in their hearts for so long that I didn't know what it felt like to stop. But in that cold, quiet room, I made a decision. A real one. I was done begging for love that felt like a bill I had to pay. I was done living my life as their silent provider, and I was done pretending to be smaller than I was. They had walked away. Now it was time for me to walk forward. The morning after my parents walked out of my hospital room was strangely quiet. The machines hummed softly beside me, and weak winter sunlight came through the window, falling across the white sheets like a thin layer of gold. My body felt heavy, my legs hot and achy, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. Pain can do that. It strips away every excuse, every illusion, and leaves you with nothing but truth. And the truth was simple. I had spent my entire life giving everything to people who would never give anything back. My hands trembled when the nurse placed my phone in them, but the shaking wasn't from the injury. It was anger. It was clarity. It was the feeling of standing at the edge of a bridge and finally realizing the only way forward was to cross it alone. I called Ethan Cole, my general manager, and the man who had stood by me since the early days of Silvergate Solutions. When he answered, his voice was gentle, almost fatherly, something I had never received from the man who actually raised me. "Hey, boss," he said, cautious but kind. "I heard about the accident. Are you okay?" "I'm alive," I said. "That's enough for now. Ethan, I need you to do something for me. Anything." And I knew he meant it. "You know the house in Maple Creek," I said. "The one my parents live in?" "Yes," he answered, his voice tightening. "The one under your name." "Sell it." My voice didn't waver. "Sell the house. As soon as possible. I want every dollar wired to my personal account." There was a short silence. I could almost picture him pushing up his glasses and frowning. "Are you sure?" he asked gently. "I know what that house meant to you." I closed my eyes and saw my mother's face twisted with judgment, my father's cold stare. "You aren't helpful anymore." The words replayed like a broken recording. "I'm sure," I said quietly. They walked away from me in a hospital bed. They can walk away from that house too. "Understood," Ethan said. "I'll handle it. I'll aim for at least 700,000. The market in Colorado is strong." Even then, he was trying to protect me. "Thank you," I whispered. For weeks, I stayed in the Cleveland hospital, healing slowly. My doctor, Dr. Emily Ross, was a calm and determined woman who reminded me of a mountain, steady, unshakable, patient. She checked my spine, checked my strength, and reminded me daily that the road ahead would be long but worth it. "You've suffered a serious spinal injury," she said one morning, looking me directly in the eye. "You will walk again. But you must commit to the work. It won't be easy." Nothing in my life had ever been easy, so I nodded. "I'll do whatever I need to do." Between physical therapy sessions and long nights staring at the ceiling, I waited for Ethan's updates. 2 weeks later, he called. "We got an offer," he said. $715,000. Clean sale. No repairs needed. Something inside me exhaled. Not relief, not joy, just a clean, sharp sense of closure. "Take it," I said. When the money transferred into my account, I felt no guilt. Not even a flicker of regret. All I felt was a steady calm, the kind that comes when you finally pull the last thorn from your skin. A few days after that, when Dr. Ross told me I was strong enough to leave the hospital, I made another decision. "I'm moving," I told Ethan when he visited. "To New York City." I want the best treatment. And a fresh start. He nodded without hesitation. I know someone in Brooklyn, he said. A real estate agent named Natalie Price. She's honest. I'll connect you. Within 3 weeks, I had seen 4 different apartments across the city. Manhattan's loud energy, Queens' quiet corners, the chaotic spark of the Bronx. But it was in Brooklyn Heights that I felt something settle inside me, something like peace. The apartment was part of a restored brownstone with tall windows and warm wood floors that glowed in the afternoon sun. There was a small balcony that overlooked a quiet street lined with maple trees, and from the corner of the balcony, if you leaned just a little, you could see the Manhattan skyline stretching out like a promise. This is the one, I whispered to myself the moment I stepped inside. It cost $1.2 million, but I paid it without hesitation. My savings, the sale of the Maple Creek house, and a small old account holding pounds from a past deal with a London bank all came together to build my new home. And for the first time in my life, the home was mine, not a gift to someone else, not a reward for someone's approval, not a way to win love that would never come. It was mine. I hired a physical therapist named Caroline, a strong but gentle woman who pushed me harder than anyone ever had. She came to my apartment 3 times a week, guiding me through exercises that made me sweat, cry, and sometimes curse. But every time I took a step without grabbing the wall, every time I stood for a few seconds longer than before, I felt pieces of my strength returning. At night, when the city outside hummed softly, I worked from my laptop. Silvergate moved forward, whether I limped or walked. Payments came in, $50,000 from a Chicago firm, $120,000 from a client in Denver, $300,000 from a tech group expanding into Europe. These numbers no longer made me dizzy with excitement. They simply felt like tools that built my independence, my safety, my future. Not once did I call my parents. Not once did they call me. I told myself it didn't matter, that their silence was a gift. And maybe it was. Because in that silence, I grew. I learned to walk again. I learned to trust myself. I learned what it felt like to live without fear of being abandoned. 3 months after moving to New York, I stood on my balcony as the sun set behind the skyline. The breeze brushed my face, carrying the sounds of distant cars and the smell of street food drifting up from the corner. I placed my hand on the railing, feeling its steady weight. For the first time in a long time, I felt free, and yet, somewhere deep inside, I knew the past wasn't finished with me. Not yet. 3 years passed like a long exhale I didn't know I had been holding. When I look back on that time now, I see it as a quiet rebuilding of my life, piece by piece, strength by strength, step by step. New York City became more than a place to hide. It became a place where I grew into the woman I had always been too scared to be. The city was loud, restless, and unapologetic, and somehow that energy worked its way into my bones, waking up parts of me that had been asleep for too long. By the time my 3rd year in Brooklyn began, my legs were stronger than ever. I still had scars, and sometimes a deep ache would settle into my spine after long hours at the office, but I walked without fear now. I walked with purpose. The physical therapist, Caroline, once told me that healing isn't only about the body, it's about the mind deciding it deserves to move forward. After everything I had survived, I believed her. My career moved forward even faster than my body did. Silvergate Solutions had grown into something bigger than I ever imagined when I was writing code in a tiny apartment in Columbus. Our main office in Midtown Manhattan was sleek and bright, with glass walls that made the space look like it was floating in air. People passed me in the hallway and greeted me as Ms. Reed, unaware that I was the reason the company existed in the first place. I preferred it that way. Anonymity was a kind of safety, power without attention, influence without exposure. One of the people who made those long office days easier was Jenna Morris, a graphic designer who worked in our building. Jenna was the kind of person whose laughter filled a room long before her body did. She had a habit of handing me cinnamon coffee every Monday morning and saying things like, "If we don't keep the caffeine flowing, the world will collapse, Hannah." She dreamed of traveling to Europe one day, Paris, Dublin, Florence. She'd talk about it endlessly. "Maybe we could go together," she said once. "A girl's trip." Something fun. Something big. We'll see, I answered with a small smile. I'm still learning how to breathe outside Harbor Falls. She didn't understand the full meaning of that sentence, but she didn't press me either. At home, my quiet world was held together by small routines. In the evenings, I often saw Lucas Grant, my neighbor, sitting on the front steps of our brownstone with his guitar. He was a gentle presence. He didn't ask for anything from me. Sometimes he'd nod and say, "Evening, Hannah." Sometimes he'd play soft notes that floated down the street like warm wind. He never asked about my past, and I never offered it. But his simple kindness reminded me there were still people in the world who didn't walk away when things were hard. Silvergate grew fast during those years. We opened a small office in Boston, partnered with firms in Berlin, and even received interest from a finance team in Madrid. I traveled to meetings, wrote proposals late into the night, and signed contracts that moved hundreds of thousands of dollars across borders. Every time I saw those numbers, I felt a small spark inside me, a spark that whispered, "You built this." Without them. Without anyone's approval. For a long time, I believed the past was behind me. That belief began to crack the day Ethan arrived in New York for a quarterly meeting. Ethan had always been more than an employee. He was one of the first people who saw my talent before it became success. I trusted him in ways I rarely trusted anyone else. After the meeting, we sat in my office while the winter afternoon slipped across the windows. He held a report in his hands, but I could tell his mind was elsewhere. He kept glancing at me with an expression that made my stomach tighten. "Your parents ever call?" he asked finally. I shook my head. No. Why would they? The only value I ever had to them was money. If they thought I was still broke, I doubt they remembered I existed. He hesitated, and for a moment I wished he wouldn't speak. But he did. "They found out," he said quietly. My heartbeat faltered. "Found out what?" "That you own Silvergate," he said. "One of your old classmates from Harbor Falls owns a small shop there now. She bought one of our software packages last month. When she saw your name on the contract, she told people." Word spread fast. I stared at him. I felt the room tilt slightly. "What happened?" I whispered. "They came to my office in Chicago," Ethan said. "Your parents. Both of them. They demanded answers. They accused me of lying to them, of turning you against them." A coldness spread through my chest. I'd spent years imagining them forgetting me. I never imagined them searching for me because they realized they needed me again. "What did you tell them?" I asked. "The truth," he answered. "That you built this company with your own hands. That you worked for years without support. That you bought them a house. That you sold it after they left you in the hospital." Your father turned bright red. Your mother cried. Then they asked where you were. "And you didn't tell them," I whispered. "No," he said firmly. "Because you deserve peace." I looked out the tall window beside me. The New York skyline glowed in the fading light, the city stretching on forever. But in that moment, I felt trapped in the past again, like the hospital room door had never fully closed. "So they know," I said. "They know everything they threw away." That night, when I walked through the crowds of Manhattan, every face looked like a memory. Sometimes, in the middle of the street, I thought I saw my mother's eyes watching me. Sometimes I heard my father's sharp tone whenever a stranger raised his voice at a taxi driver. Trauma doesn't leave quietly. It lingers like a ghost in familiar shadows. But life kept moving forward. I kept moving forward. Weeks passed. Silvergate had its best quarter yet. My body grew stronger. My steps grew steadier. I laughed more with Jenna. I listened to more music from Lucas's guitar. I built a new life, one day at a time. For a little while, I believed the storm had passed. But deep down, some quiet part of me knew better. The past doesn't disappear when you decide to move on. It waits. And soon it was going to knock on my door. It was a rainy Thursday evening in Brooklyn when my past finally caught up with me. I had just come home from a long day at the office, the kind of day filled with back-to-back meetings, new proposals, and endless messages from our partners in Europe. My shoes were soaked from the puddles gathered along the sidewalks, and my hair was damp from the mist that followed me all the way from the subway station. I slipped off my coat, hung it on the hook near the door, and walked into my kitchen, feeling the quiet of my apartment settle around me like a warm blanket. I made tea the way I always did, peppermint, with a dash of honey and a moment to breathe while the steam rose. The city outside my windows buzzed faintly, a soft hum beneath the sound of rain tapping gently on the glass. I was tired, but it was a peaceful kind of tired, the kind that comes from knowing you earned your rest. I had my cup in hand and was about to sink into my couch when it happened. 3 slow, heavy knocks. They weren't polite knocks. They weren't friendly or familiar. They felt like a warning, like someone was waking up a ghost that I had buried years ago.
My heart tightened in my chest.
For a moment, I wondered if it was Lucas asking for help carrying groceries upstairs or Jenna showing up with her usual burst of cheer. But something about the sound, deep and steady, told me this wasn't either of them. I set my tea on the table and walked toward the door, each step slow and cautious. When I reached it, I didn't open it right away. Instead, I pressed my eye to the peephole, and there they were. My mother, Grace Reed, standing in a soaked coat with her hair flattened by rain. She looked smaller than I remembered, as if life itself had folded her inward. Next to her was my father, Thomas Reed, his shoulders hunched, his gray hair plastered against his forehead. Their faces were pale, tired, worn down not by time alone, but by something that looked suspiciously like desperation. It felt like the floor beneath me shifted. For 3 years, I had built a life far from them, a life filled with work, with slow healing, with small joys and new people who cared in ways my parents never had. Seeing them again was like being dragged back into a story I thought I had already finished. I opened the door only a few inches and kept the chain locked in place. My mother gasped softly, her hand rising to her mouth. Hannah, her voice cracked as if the sound of my name broke something inside her. Baby, it's you. Thank God. My father didn't cry. He never did. But his eyes narrowed as he looked past me into the warm glow of my apartment. So this is where you've been, he said, his tone sharp even now. In New York City. In some fancy place while we suffered. The words made my stomach twist. I stared at them both, unable to believe how quickly they turned themselves into the victims of a story where they were the ones who walked away first. You suffered? I asked quietly. You left me in a hospital bed. You told me I wasn't helpful anymore. My mother reached toward the narrow opening of the door, as if she could press her way inside through pity alone. We were scared, she said quickly. We didn't know what to do. You said you lost your job. I never said that. I cut in. We thought, she stumbled over her words. We thought you couldn't help us anymore. We didn't know you were, she swallowed hard. We didn't know you had all this money. A bitter laugh escaped me.
Right.
So if you had known I owned the company, you wouldn't have abandoned me. That's what you're saying. My father stiffened. Don't twist things, he said. We're your parents. We came all the way from Harbor Falls. We spent hundreds of dollars on travel and hotels just to find you. Open the door. Let us in. We're family. That word, family, hit me deep, but not in the way they intended. It reminded me of the people who had stood beside me when I was truly alone. Lena, the nurse who held my hand when I cried in the hospital. Ethan, who sold their house without question and shielded my truth when they came demanding answers. Jenna, who brought soup to my door when I had the flu and made me laugh on days when my spine throbbed. Lucas, who greeted me every evening with a soft smile and gentle music drifting from his guitar. Those were the people who acted like family, even without the title. I took a slow breath. The rain outside grew louder, becoming a steady drum against the building. No, I said softly but firmly. My mother blinked, as if she misunderstood. No. I'm not letting you in, I repeated. You left me when I needed you the most. You didn't visit. You didn't call. Not once. And now you're here because you found out I'm wealthy. That's not love. That's need. My father's face tightened into anger. We are your parents, he said sharply. We gave you life. And I gave you a house, I answered. I paid your bills. I gave you everything I could. And you still threw me away. My mother's voice broke. Please, Hannah, just talk to us.
We're sorry,
Truly. Are you sorry you left me?
I asked.
Or sorry that you no longer have access to the benefits of having a successful daughter? She had no answer. My father stepped forward, his voice rising. If you shut us out now, don't you ever come back. You're not our daughter anymore. His words didn't stab me the way they once would have. They didn't cut. They didn't wound. Instead, they freed me. I know, I whispered. You made that clear years ago. I closed the door slowly. Their silhouettes disappeared behind the wood. I slid the chain off and turned the lock. For a moment, I stood there, my hand still resting on the knob, the echo of their voices fading with every passing second. My mother's crying drifted down the hallway. My father's muttering grew distant. Then all that remained was the rain. Inside my own home, I walked to the window and looked out at the wet street below, cars crawling by with headlights glowing, people hurrying under umbrellas, the city alive in its own determined rhythm. I thought of all the years I stood outside the metaphorical door of their hearts, begging for a love that never showed up. But I wasn't outside the door anymore. I was inside. This home, bought with dollars I earned, built with my own strength, was mine. My company reaching across America and into Europe was mine. My future, scarred but steady, was mine. My parents had cast me out long ago. But this time, I closed the door myself, not from hate, but from self-respect. My name is Hannah Reed. I am a woman. I am the author of my own life, and I choose who gets to stand at my door and who never gets to step inside again.